talk about that then, and related to one of the articles you wrote. Well, actually, about many. You've written a few about learning vocabulary, about the most effective way of learning vocabulary. Uh, you have kind of hinted at it in a way, but maybe you could give us some details as to what is the key strategy that can help you retain words faster.
Retains word faster. Well, it really depends on what you're doing after learning the vocabulary, because well, spaced repetition, obviously, right? It's just a memory strategy for memorizing things better and in a more efficient way. So that's one thing. Then when it comes to vocabulary per se, you obviously want to know how the word is pronounced as opposed to how it's just written, because otherwise you just invent your own kind of pidgin, because you just transfer pronunciation in your native language into whatever you see written, and it just, yeah. So you have to have the audio. Then just being committed to it and like not dropping it in the middle. So you learned 50 words and then you forgot about it for a week and then you started again. But yeah, so these are very basic things. But then most people approach language learning and vocabulary learning in general very, like, for them it's like an unlimited quest. You just, if you're learning a language, you keep learning vocabulary with this kind of apps, for example, right? I just dropped the apps after like 1 month of focusing on them, and I start reading. So here comes the vocabulary reinforcement in natural context, in the context of actual sentences, and you get exposed to the same word in different meanings, in different contexts, in different topics, and this kind of helps recall, helps reinforcement.
So another article I see is kind of interesting. Is the one where you say the one that is titled "How to Start Speaking Another Language When You're an Introvert." So you already mentioned that you structured the course in a way that suits you better because you said that you're an introvert and thus you want to postpone speaking as much as possible. But for all the introverts out there, what would you tell them? What pieces of advice would you give them so that they can start speaking faster and learn languages faster?
Yeah, fair enough. It's like when we think about learning languages, and the ultimate goal of learning language is the ability to speak, right? So for introverts, it's not necessarily the first of all, not necessarily the goal, because many people just enjoy reading, right? And second of all, they're not very comfortable with the concept itself, like speaking, and especially feeling incompetent, being shy, right? And meeting with strangers, and then meeting with strangers in a way where you can't necessarily show your best self. So what I generally recommend is, first of all, accept this part of yourself, that you don't necessarily want to have small talks and this often meaningless conversations that you're gonna have as a novice learner, kind of. And then practice in very safe environments. So when I was kind of dealing with these problems, I first waited for the moment where you start having these thoughts in the foreign language. When you have enough input, sometimes like your brain starts like throwing phrases into you in the foreign language, right? So you wait for this moment, you wait for this feeling, and then start having conversations with yourself. As an introvert, you should be good at that. So that, then there is Pimsleur, which is the speaking program. It's basically it's kind of handcrafted conversation. So they give you a phrase in a foreign language and you have to respond. Then they give you the way you should have responded, and you basically compare the two and correct yourself. And there's repetition, and this is how you learn. So that can be also a very safe way to kind of ease into speaking. And then there are, like, I tend to put myself in a variety of oh shit, I have to speak now kind of situations. So like one of the things I did with Spanish, for example, so I already had a high level of comprehension. So I went to Spain and signed up for a PADI rescue diver course in Spanish with a Spanish speaking instructor. And so he spoke to me in Spanish, and then obviously I had to respond to him in Spanish, and he didn't really speak English. And we kind of had lots of, hands gesture conversations, but ultimately day 2 or 3, the course is like 5 days. You kind of ease into that, and you're with the same person, and this person serves you as a mentor. Plus, you're trying not to die during the course on the water, so you really put in a lot of effort into that. So yeah,
You,
things like that.
you definitely want to understand, make sure you understand the diver, the instructor, because otherwise the risks there are, the stakes are quite high. So
Yeah, there are consequences.
you definitely pushed yourself there. You were like, let's
Mhm.
put myself in a very extreme position. So I may make sure I have to make the most of it in order to, I have to make the most in order to understand what he's saying. And
Yeah,
otherwise,
exactly.
yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. Then you have another article about translating songs. It's a step-by-step guide to learning with music. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Why is it important to learn with music, and why what is that step-by-step guide? What are the steps for learning with music?
Okay, so first of all, it's one of my probably oldest articles. So I used to do that like 7 years ago when I was just learning. I don't even know what I was learning, English, Polish. And I used the service called Lyrics Translate to just improve my understanding of languages I was learning. So I think I was translating English songs into Russian or Polish songs into Russian or vice versa. And the thing about it is you love the song and you probably know some of the lyrics already. Um, so you have high levels of motivation to improve your understanding, improve your comprehension in general. And then you put effort into writing about it, into like finding correspondences between the concepts in two languages. So it's very deep encoding of words, vocabulary in part, right, and grammatical structures as well. And I feel like this kind of work, when you're really enjoying it, can really help you a lot into learning some parts of the language in general.
What you were essentially saying is you were encouraging people to translate words that hadn't been translated yet, right? And to publish that online. So that,
Well, translate songs, and they're usually already translated because Lyrics
yeah.
Translate is pretty big service, and it's based on volunteer work, and most people are
Mm.
multilingual in general. But it's a good exercise in general. You can translate it and you can put it out there, and there are good translations and there are bad translations. Some are poetic. Um, I think it works better. Well, for the purpose of the website itself, it works better when you translate it into your native language. So you know the language you're writing in, right? And then you're just trying to decipher what the target language is saying, and it helps you to understand that better. But like if you have a high competence in writing in your target language, that could be an excellent exercise as well.
Then we have five creative ways to use Wikipedia for language learning. So
Mm,
tell us about that.
okay. Oh God.
If you
Again,
remember,
like I'm
I don't want to put you in because maybe I with writing, what happens is that you might write something, and if you haven't reviewed that in maybe years, in your case, you might not have it very fresh. So that's why I'm just saying.
no, that's fair. I mean, I have no idea what I wrote in that article because it was at least 5 years ago, but I do still use Wikipedia. when it comes to languages and language learning. So, for example, you don't know some kind of a technical term in your target language. You need to translate some technical term and very specifically, I don't know, something, some kind of a bike part, like, I don't know, a derailleur, right? A shifter on a bike. And you have no idea how to say it in Russian. I just have no idea how to say it in Russian, actually. And so you go and search for a Wikipedia article that explaining about this part, say, right, about shifters on bikes. And then you go to language sections, and there are like the same article in multiple languages, and you can choose like Russian, German. And you go to German, and you have, first of all, how to say it correctly. Usually there's also pronunciation of this technical term, and then there is context of how to use this word. And it's just helpful because, like, if you just put this word out of context in Google Translate, it's going to give you something that is not correct because technical terms, and they're not translated very well usually by common, translator apps. So that's one way to do it. Another one is, again, use it for reading, for example. You read an article in English, you switch to French, read it in French. It's usually about the same information. You already got your prior knowledge from the reading it in English, and then you read it in French. You take advantage of your prior knowledge of the topic to read this. So yeah, I think this. And okay, another thing, for example, when it comes to finding materials in the languages that are not necessarily very well supported, I don't know, Hawaiian, Samoan, stuff like that. Sometimes you can find some interesting content on Wikipedia because it's, again, volunteer based and just using crowdsourcing of native speakers write about the topic in their native language, and you can use this as a material if you cannot find books which you want. So yeah.
Then we have following your passion for a language will make you waste time. And there you make the thesis that there you say that you're increasingly inclined to believe that passion is highly overrated when it comes to choosing the language that you're going to study, and solely relying on your personal preferences will only result in wasting your time. So what was the thesis in this article?
Yeah, well, I still maintain the same opinion, honestly, despite my, like, deep inside, I I would love to believe that passion helps you to learn the language. Like, I'm passionate about Greek. I love Greek. It's an excellent language. It's beautiful. I love Greek songs. And I spent some time learning Greek, but I never really took it to the level where I would like read books in it and like be able to listen to podcasts in it, for example. And the reason why is not the lack of interest, obviously, but more like the lack of uh, pressure and sort of a sense of urgency in learning the language. Because the only languages I've like really learned to a very good extent where I can actually use them in life in professional context and everyday on everyday basis are the languages I needed for education, for immigration, for work, stuff like that. Um, because I put a lot of effort into learning them and I really needed them, and I ended up using them in education, work, the areas of life that you interact with
Yeah.
every day, right? When it comes to languages you're passionate about, unless you really, 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 really need them, it's very easy to fall off the track, fall off the wagon, so to say, as soon as something important hits, like you've got a work deadline, so you've got no time for learning the language. Something happens in your life, you drop your passion project to focus on something else.
I think in order to contextualize and make it a little bit clearer for the listener, when you say a language you're passionate about, you're implying that the language is not widely spoken. Because in the article, you speak about languages such as you give the examples of Swedish, Kurdish, Hawaiian and so on. So I think you're mostly specifically talking about those languages which can't be used in practice in general unless you're living in the country. But you're still very motivated to learn, right? Because you could be actually very motivated in learning Chinese or French or widely spoken languages. But in this article, you were talking about the languages that are not that widespread.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of works both ways. I mean, you can be super passionate about learning Chinese, but unless you have a very specific plan on how you're going to use it in life, unless you actually need it for, again, education, work, or immigration, it's going to be very, very hard, in my opinion, to learn it to a good degree and maintain it.
Well, but
That was my experience.
I would argue that in most of the cases, people learn languages for fun, not because they need them. So maybe we should all try to force ourselves to do what you did and go somewhere where they speak the language we are trying to learn and take a diving course or take whatever course in order to to force ourselves to actually need a language. But I would say in general, like people learn languages that they don't need, or in at least in many cases, you know. So, but still, many of them, even though they don't need it, they still manage to pull it off because they manage to maintain the motivation, right? So, what would you
Yeah,
say to
but
that?
I mean, if you learn a language you don't need, the first question is to what extent you learn it. Like, do you become um, a competent speaker in it? Are you able to read something in it? Are you able to use it? Because uh, languages are kind of a thing that use it or lose it, right? If you don't use it, you lose confidence in using it and speaking it and understanding it. And then you can't really say that you will, well, I know this language because you haven't practiced it in a while and it's rusty. And unless you get something that pushes you to use it, it's very tricky to maintain them.
Hmm.
So that's my main tenet. You have to have a very good reason for learning the languages and putting a large amount of hours into this basically project and then maintaining them throughout your lifetime. And unless you have family or friends or very strong connections or work or something living in the country, it's going to be kind of challenging with maintaining a language that you do not necessarily need. Yeah.
No, I agree. You would have to put a lot of effort into maintaining a language that you don't necessarily need or that you don't use on a regular basis or on a daily or monthly basis with family or friends. So yeah, it requires a huge amount of effort, and only those who are very much into language learning are going to be willing to put in those hours. If not, you probably end up forgetting it a little bit and leaving it aside. That's true.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's things like language attrition, right? I mean, I've been living in Canada for like 7 years, and I'm speaking Russian maybe like once a month, so it's very rare. And sometimes it's not like I don't feel comfortable speaking it, but sometimes I just can't speak on specific topics. For example, the ones that linguistics, right? Because I learned all linguistics in English. So it's very hard for me to even explain what the hell I was doing for 4 or 5 years to my parents because all the terminology is stored in English. And it takes a lot of effort to kind of try to find correspondences in Russian. So, and some constructions are kind of transferring from English. So you find yourself almost translating from your dominant language word by word into your native language, which is the weirdest thing. Um, yeah, so things like this are very, very common.
And final article, how tequila helps you speak a foreign language better. So
How to what?
how
Sorry.
tequila helps you speak a foreign
Oh
language
God.
better.
Yeah, okay. Tequila. Tequila is very important. Yeah. So there was research, I think from Netherlands or something. There are several articles, several research groups studying the same concept essentially. So we know that alcohol helps to lower inhibitions, right? So you drink, you become not like disinhibited, but you become more relaxed and perhaps more talkative, um, more at ease. And the tenet is, would this at easiness kind of help you to speak in a foreign language? So in that particular case that I described, I think they gave a couple of cocktails or one cocktail to bilinguals or speakers of one language learning another language, and then tested their pronunciation of that second language, and it improved after a certain amount of alcohol, but then dropped after another shot. So the basic idea is, yes, you can have a little drink and your pronunciation in the foreign language might improve, or like generally your comfort speaking this foreign language might improve because of disinhibition. But if you drink too much, just a little bit more, then it all goes to hell and your pronunciation drops and you can't form grammatical sentences. There you go.
Yeah, so alcohol can actually help then learning a foreign language as long as it's done in a moderate dose.
Yeah, well, not learn, but perform in a
Perfect.
foreign language. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay, that might be a good tip for introverts as well. If there's any
that's what I was
introvert
thinking.
or out there who's kind of shy when it comes to speaking, who's not willing, who can't make the final step of starting to speak, or who's very reluctant to do that, he can take a small shot, and he'll certainly perform a bit better.
Yeah,
That will certainly help.
yeah, exactly.